Dave Hebler was one of the few Yankees who became a member of the Inner Circle, the Memphis Mafia. Born in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, in 1937, he is of average build and given to a quiet, almost intellectual manner of speech. His distaste for guns set him aside from the Memphis Boys, who, following Elvis's lead, always seemed to have an arsenal somewhere on hand. As a child, a stray BB slug, fired by another child, deprived him of the sight of his right eye. When he got close to Presley, he adopted the habit of wearing a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, although he was not crazy about the idea. Despite his mild manner and his distinct distaste for gun sports, he can be one of the most lethal men imaginable. When he first met Elvis, he was a 5th degree black belt karate master. Today he has a 7th degree. He stays away from street fights, and he is not much of a boozer, but in 3 seconds, 2.5 seconds on a good day, he can deliver a combination of 13 blows to a man's body that will first cripple and then kill. In the fall of 1972, Dave had undergone a rather big change in his life. He had left his job and split with his wife, the mother of his 2 young daughters. He was now coming out of the tailspin of a broken marriage and working off his frustrations by devoting himself almost around the clock to the art of karate, in which he had been involved for 19 years. He was particularly close to his instructor, Ed Parker, a man regarded as the Doyen of American karate. Parker comes from a prominent family in Hawaii and is even a shade sharper than Hebler when it comes to delivering killer chops and kicks. Parker's lightning expertise with his feet and hands had drawn him to the attention of Elvis Presley, who had become smitten with the art while in the U.S. Army in Germany. Parker would often tour with Presley and act as his karate mentor. One fall evening in 1972, Hebler met Elvis Presley for the first time. It was around 7, and Dave was working out at Ed Parker's karate studio in Santa Monica. On the mats that night were 15 of Los Angeles' top karate exponents swishing the air with deadly chops and kicks. I remember there was a little activity around the door to Ed's studio, Dave says. I took a break from training, looked up and saw the rather dramatic entrance of a good-looking, husky guy, a little overweight, with jet black hair, dressed in tight black pants and a white Spanish-style bolero shirt. It was Elvis. Presley would often drop by the Parker studio, shoot the breeze and sometimes work out. Of course, it wasn't a casual visit. Elvis Presley never moves without several telephone calls to his destination, and then he leaves with an entourage that can number a dozen people. Presley came into the studio at the head of his entourage and shook hands all around. He was accompanied by a beautiful girl who, Dave Hebler later learned, was Linda Thompson. To Dave's surprise, after a brief conversation, Presley got out on the mats with some of the most deadly karate talent in the country. I have been an instructor, having had my own studio, so I don't know whether Ed manipulated it, but he paired me off with Elvis, perhaps thinking I could handle any problem that being paired off with Elvis could present. In these situations, one member of the pair acts as a karate dummy. That is, he takes simulated kicks and blows. He reacts as if the blows were making full contact. Often, of course, they do. But in training, you have to keep that stuff to a minimum or you would have broken bones all over the place. Real karate artists are very controlled both in their movements and their emotions. It's not something to be played at. Now I have been in these situations a million times. You are usually working out with someone of similar experience to yourself, someone who knows what he is doing. Within seconds out there on the mats with Elvis, it was very obvious to me that 1, Elvis didn't know half as much about karate as he thought he did, and 2, he hardly knew where he was.
He was moving very sluggishly and lurching around like a man who'd had far too much to drink.
When I got close to him, I could smell his breath, and it sure didn't seem as if he had been drinking. I mean, he was actually tripping over and damn near falling on his butt. Somehow, I got the drift of things, and while I couldn't make him look like an expert, I tried to react to his moves in such a way that he wouldn't look half as bad as he could have. Of course, the entourage, headed by Linda, was fascinated by him. By the looks on their faces, you would have thought he was a world champion. Thankfully, the karate demonstration by Elvis ended, but then some bright spark suggested we have an impromptu tournament with guess who officiating. Elvis. According to Dave Hebler, officiating, even for an expert, is not an easy task. You have to really know what you're doing, says Dave. Those blows are whipping by at 100 miles an hour, and you have to pick up on them very fast. You also had to know instantly the ones that would connect and the ones that would just float into the air. It is very difficult. You can imagine what it was like for Elvis, who, in fairness, never officiated at a real karate tournament. I mean, I promise you, it was hopeless. Hebler, seeing the beginning of a very embarrassing situation, took up a position behind Presley, the referee. I am standing behind him, to help by prompting the action, you know, left hand punch, right kick, and I was giving him the points, so he would know who to appoint as a winner. At the end of it, Elvis sluggishly shook hands with Dave with a hint of recognition that Dave had helped him through an impossible moment, even for an experienced referee. Not that Elvis didn't sincerely believe he was in charge of the situation. He did. But, in the back of his mind, he must have recognized that I had helped him. For Dave Hebler, those 2 hours out there on the mats were some of the most awkward moments he had ever had in a karate studio. 2 days later, Hebler was working out in his own small karate studio on Alosta Boulevard in Glendora, outside Los Angeles. It was a modest operation but was netting Dave about $200 a week, and he had a young and enthusiastic following. It was fun and it was his. I got a call from Ed Parker, who was with Elvis a lot around that time. Ed said he was calling for Elvis and that Elvis wanted to come out to the studio. I was surprised and very flattered. I said, "Wow, sure. How about 4 p.m.? That will be great." At 4 that day, a gigantic custom-made blue Mercedes Benz rolled up. Guys poured out of it like it was a marine invasion. The last one out, of course, was King Elvis. It was quite an impressive sight. There were all these members of the palace guard walking in front of him as if they were casing the place, and behind them came the king. But what was the most amusing about this spectacle was Elvis's appearance. It was about 74 degrees, maybe warmer. Anyway, Elvis was wearing this unbelievably thick overcoat. It was black with red piping. He had a ring on every finger, and a gigantic ram's head necklace, which I learned later the Hilton Hotel had given him as a present, and which I was told was worth $40,000. And then, get this, on top of his head, he was wearing this goddamn turban. So help me, he looked like he had just walked off a set for a Valentino movie. Underneath this overcoat, he wore a karate gi, the traditional karate outfit. It was just straight out bizarre. Man, my 2 little daughters, Lori, 12, and Christy, 11, were very impressed. However, he looked like an ancient sheik, but all he wanted to do was fool around on the karate mats. There were some other students at the studio, and Elvis must have realized he looked extremely out of place. He offered Dave an explanation. "I'm wearing this damn turban because I didn't wash my hair and it looks bad." Man, Dave really didn't care too much. He admits he was impressed that a man like Presley would drive all the way out to Glendora just to see him. "It was quite a build, up to my ego," says Dave, even though, thinking back, he did look sort of ridiculous. That day was the first time Dave saw Sonny West. He didn't say much. Dave remembers. He just stood on the side very quietly. His appearance was sort of quietly menacing. He was watching that no body tagged Elvis one as we fooled around on the mats. Very watchful. It's a funny thing when you're into karate. You get to know a lot about how a person moves their body. Just the way he was holding himself. Just by the way he was moving, I knew he was wearing a shoulder holster. Yeah, Sonny remembers. I had this special holster on that held the .38 upside down in a spring. I could whip that thing out faster than you could say karate. We were in a strange part of LA, and we always carried the heat. You never know what can happen when you are around Elvis. There are so many nutcases running around. Besides, I see all these crazy mothers leaping around on the floor, doing karate and stuff. I felt a whole lot safer. Dave had a partner at the karate studio named Jim Thompson, no relation to Linda Thompson, who, Dave recalls, says to me, "Watch out for that big fucker in the corner carrying the heat." It was, of course, Sonny, who between his silence and his gun, looked sort of menacing, but who, of course, became a very close friend of mine. Presley seemed to lap up the atmosphere of karate. He was getting very expansive in his conversation. He was telling the assembly, which included Sonny, Ed Parker, Charlie Hodge, Elvis's rhythm guitarist, and Gerald Peters, his chauffeur, a dry, humored English man who once drove for Winston Churchill, what he intended to do for the future of karate. "I'm gonna start my own karate system," Elvis promised. "We will make our own movie about the art and have our own competitions." Presley himself planned to star in the lead role as the boss tough guy. That day Presley stayed there, under the watchful eye of Sonny, for about an hour. He went through some basic karate kicks and moves, but Dave noticed something about his movements that was very similar to what he saw the first time he met him, at Ed Parker's studio. You had the idea if Elvis had really dedicated himself to the art, he could be good, but he only played at it. He never really worked hard. 99 at it and drove himself. Also, he seemed to stumble around a lot, tripping and fumbling moves. Although the sight of a man wearing a black and red overcoat, turban, necklace and rings, fanning the air with karate chops and kicks, was a curious enough sight, there was something else that seemed a little out of focus. He was sweating profusely, Dave says. I mean, he had a right to be with all that clothing on. But, man, it was literally pouring out of him. And his eyes, they were big, red and watery. It was like he had a dreadful case of flu or fever. I just couldn't put my finger on what was wrong with him. After the brief visit, Elvis Presley led his entourage back to the blue Mercedes. As the impeccable chauffeur, Peters, held the door open for Presley, two of Dave Hebler's students looked at each other. "Man," said one to the other, "I'd like to have half of whatever he's got inside him." Both were young men who had had brutal experiences with drugs.